Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Ryan King, and I get the privilege of serving as the CEO of Ardent Mentoring. We are going to begin here in just one moment. We have many people joining the room. If you'd like to put in the chat, we would love to know from where in the world you are at. So if you just put in that chat, we can celebrate people joining us from all over our incredible world. We got one. Thank you, Ellen. Charlotte, North Carolina. Such a beautiful place. Ooh, Grand Rapids, Michigan. Another beautiful place. Good friends there. And there we go. Martin, Nairobi, Kenya. Seattle. I hope it's not raining, Daryl. Oh, Corey, you're right down the street from me. I am in Carlsbad, California, and you're in Encinitas. Chicago. Wow, everything. Cleveland. This is great. Oh, Bruce, greetings from New Zealand. Incredible. There's someone from Canada. Chris, welcome. Oh, I missed Ecuador along the way. Incredible country. David, Ardent Mentoring is the organization putting this on, and I will tell you a little bit about us here as we just begin in one moment. Steve, John is also from the DC area, more from North Carolina and Canada. Jim Reeb, welcome. Good old Lancaster, Hershey, PA. Sarah from the UK, thank you so much for joining us. Wonderful. Well, folks, I'm going to go ahead and get started here. I know that people are still joining the call. And wanted to thank you once again for taking time out of your busy days and the incredible work that each of you are doing to join us here today, to hear about how we can make a greater spiritual and social impact in the world and how we can measure that. David, thank you so much for joining us today and taking time to help each of us grow. Before we jump into David's presentation and the webinar that we have scheduled for today, I wanted to tell you a little bit about Ardent Mentoring and the work that we're doing around the world. Ardent serves high-capacity social entrepreneurs who are founders, CEOs, and executives and/or organizational leaders of for-profit and nonprofit enterprises. We serve some of you on the call and other incredible entrepreneurs with subject matter expertise, executive mentoring from world-class Christian entrepreneurs in order to help each of you scale your work and multiply the impact you're having. We match each mentee with a mentor who has expertise in their areas of need in this specific season, has experience working in their industries and contexts, and is also inspired by the work that you are doing. Our mentoring brings together consulting, coaching, and spiritual formation as our mentors help these social entrepreneurs make high-level decisions, understand the impact of those decisions within your enterprise and the communities you serve, and at the same time help you build a foundation of faith, family, work-life balance, and identity outside of your role in your enterprise. Knowing that we want to see you be incredibly successful, scale your work and multiply your impact, but we don't want it to see it come at the cost of something far more near and dear at home and in your personal life. And if you are interested in learning more about becoming an Ardent mentee or an Ardent mentor, we'll have more about next steps for you at the end of our time together, and we'll also follow up with you via email to this call. And finally, before we go ahead and pray and get started here, please feel free to put your questions in the chat. as David is speaking, and we'll be sure to curate them and answer them during our Q&A time. And that chat should have been opened up for you. And I see someone on the call who is a close friend and a board member, and I am going to call him out, whether he likes it or not. Stephen Robertson, would you go ahead and open our time in prayer, please? Logan, if you could go ahead and unmute Steve. Oh, there we go. I got it too. Thank you, Steve.
Well, hello. Thank you so much for that surprise.
Yes.
Luckily, I had prepared some notes, and so I'll be reading Psalm 111. Thank you all. Father, we just thank you for this time, bringing us all together. We want to glorify you most of all in what we do on a daily basis. And it's just such a joy to bring people together that are mentors, mentees, and all looking to do and steward what we've been given well, so that you not only can trust us with more, but so that what you've entrusted to us, we do with excellence and brings glory and honor to your name. We're excited to hear what David has to share with us today. We're excited to make new friends and new connections. And most of all, we're excited to show the world who you are through everything that we touch on a daily basis. Thank you for bringing us together, and bless this message in Jesus' name.
Amen. Thank you, Steve. Really appreciate that. I now have the pleasure of introducing to you a good friend, David Bronkema, who I've known for a number of years. David is an ardent mentor and also a professor in the College of Business and Leadership at Eastern University in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, or right around Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. And before joining Eastern, David grew up in Portugal and Italy in a missionary family, spent 5 years in Honduras working with a Honduran development organization, and then worked with the American Friends Service Committee throughout Central America. He is well equipped to speak to us about the topic that we have for today, as he has a lot of experience living it out and teaching it to others. So I will go ahead and be quiet and turn the floor over to you, David. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks, Ryan. Thanks for that introduction. And as I share my screen here, just a big word of thanks to you, Ryan, to Steve, and to Logan and the entire Ardent team for putting all of this together. And also just a special word of thanks. It's just so much fun to see so many familiar faces around, just old friends, new friends, brothers and sisters in Christ. And one of the things that I love is just to learn from these. So I will be presenting kind of on that blog, but I'm very much looking forward to the time of discussion and to learning from you all as well. So let me go ahead and get started here. So the agenda for today, this is what I'll hope to cover in just a few brief minutes, hopefully no more than 10 or so. Just to introduce those 3 questions, right, that help in measuring social and spiritual impact. Look at the context in which we might be asking them. Revisit the questions then and some of their key aspects. Looking at some of the nuances about the process of asking them. A quick application with a person who volunteered. And Olivia is here on the call. Thank you so much for that. And then we'll go into our questions and discussion. So the 3 questions, as you saw from the blog, hopefully you had a chance to just take a look at them, are what specific change, spiritual or social, do you think that we can bring about, right? And these, of course, are geared towards helping you, hopefully, to measure these kinds of things better. Number 2, then, after you kind of define that, do we have specific things that we're doing, specific things that you're doing to bring about that change? And then, finally, as a result of that those first 2 steps, how then can we best measure? So again, just to introduce those questions, and let me go to the context, right? In my experience, these questions are useful in all situations. It may be that you're just starting out in terms of your planning, your monitoring, your evaluation of whatever you're doing. You may already have robust processes in which you're engaged. But again, I've found in working with organizations and businesses that it's always good to periodically revisit these kinds of questions. Any place in the middle of these 2, and also I've seen, it's been really interesting, actually a student of mine kind of pointed this out, they're useful in other areas, and even the personal one, wherever you're trying to engage in intentional planning, these three questions, for some reason, right, seem to be useful. So, I also want to acknowledge that most, probably all of us, it's hard, right, to really allocate time and energy to this process of evaluating and measuring. And you may be getting a business off the ground. It's taking every waking moment and then some, even in your sleep, right? You're dreaming about it, or you're trying to manage everything, right, including the organizational and business demands, along with the projects and programs themselves, right? You're also facing feelings in yourself and among your staff that time is better allocated elsewhere. Why should we kind of allocate time to measuring things or to going through this process when we kind of know what we're doing is good work, and kind of takes away from that, adds more burdens to us. Also, it can be a little bit daunting, right? Where do you even start with this sometimes? And if we do start, how are we going to deal with kind of the pressures from the donors, right? Pressures from staff, taking into account the people with whom we work. So all of those things can be kind of daunting. I just want to acknowledge that context. But I think that these three questions, and in my experience, it helps you to just pick one thing, to start small if you're feeling kind of overwhelmed, and building it into what you're doing, I think, is important for several reasons. One is, especially, if you can just start small in this process, it starts to help you create a culture, right, of ongoing reflection, of ongoing prayer around this, about this measurement and the planning, and of course, around the feedback that you're getting. It also, this process of asking these questions geared towards eventually measurement, helps you alter to nurture bonds, because it's a very participatory process and you're engaging in this reflection together. The Spirit is speaking through each and every person. I also believe that it leads to more effective approaches, and I'll leave aside kind of exploring what effective means. But in my experience, many organizations that are struggling with measurement, perhaps most often, it tends to be because that definition of what they're trying to seek, whether it's something small that they're focusing on or something large, is not quite clearly defined, or if it is clearly defined, the activities geared towards achieving that goal or those results are not necessarily sufficiently defined themselves or lined up. And also, I think starting small, in my experience, and actually this happened to me when I was, and I wasn't asking these three specific questions, but something that was kind of the equivalent. I just saw the staff, from whom I learned a tremendous amount, were quite skeptical of it first, and then they fell in love with it. So I think it's just something, again, that its usefulness becomes apparent to all, and there's more, if we can use the word, buy-in and ownership. So again, let's just take a quick look at the questions and what I think are kind of some of the key elements to keep in mind as we engage in our discussion. So the first one, again, starting out, right, with that definitional aspect. What specific change, right, do we think we can bring about, or that we are called to bring about? And I really think the important thing here is to keep asking this question. You see, I have three varies there, right? Keep digging until you have something very, very, very specific, very clearly defined. We go to the second question then, right, which is really geared towards the activities, right? What do we have specific things that we are doing to bring about that thing that we've just defined? And again, here the crucial aspect of this is to make sure is that these activities are very clearly targeted towards that thing that you defined in number one. And then finally, right, after you've done that, my experience has been working with organizations is that once you've done these two, the third one actually tends to pop out relatively quickly. It may require some creativity in terms of how actually you're going to go about collecting the information, but kind of the indicators, right, the things that you're looking for, you've pretty much already determined those with one and two. So that's been my experience, but looking forward to seeing if others have other experiences as well. Just a few nuances to this. What I've seen, right, is that many times you may have defined what you're aiming for very clearly. Then you start talking, is what we're doing geared towards that? And in that conversation, what you'll become aware of is, Yeah, we what we're doing is not clearly aligned, and it's not really feasible for us to think about accomplishing that. So sometimes that second question will lead you back to the first one to kind of reformulate, to revise, right? What might be more feasible or realistic to achieve. The second thing is, right, if you're already measuring things, and again, I've come across organizations that are doing a great job of measuring things, but don't necessarily have those first two things in line, nothing of that goes to waste, right? Because it helps you inform the conversation, the discussion, and started giving you some feedback. So, don't be afraid that, oh my goodness, we've been measuring things and we haven't done those first two, and that's a tragedy or disaster. No, it's I've always seen organizations find it to be very helpful as part of this process. And the third thing, the third nuance is that this particular process is a specific kind of process, right? Where you are building up things contextually that are very much dependent and geared towards what your organization is doing, what it's been called to do, what your business is doing, what it's been called to do, and based on kind of this planning process. And now, there are other organizations, right, that are doing perhaps things that are similar to what you're doing, that may have developed surveys and questionnaires. And, knowing and researching what other organizations are doing, how they've gone about it, what kind of questions they're using, how they're going about their measurement, definitely, right, is helpful. But again, I want to come back to, sometimes it can be daunting, right? We have to do all this research, find out what others are doing. So that's why I put it there. I think that can be a very good supplement, but I don't think it's absolutely necessarily, and I also don't think it should replace your own internal processes, whether it be in your business or your organization, of going through this process of asking those questions. All right, so I kind of zoomed through that a little bit, and now Olivia Molura, Olivia, I'm sorry, Molura. I don't know how to pronounce your name well, and we haven't met. And I just have to say, Olivia, I was so impressed. Olivia's with Mission One. I was so impressed looking at your website and just what you're doing, the way that you're focusing in on the local actors, taking your cues from them, coming alongside them. And so what I'm going to do with Olivia, she volunteered. I picked out something, Olivia, from your website that intrigued me, right? And you said here, we have used what we've learned to develop resources to both empower our Indigenous partners as they foster healthy relationships with their own ministry context. So if you don't mind, what Olivia and I are going to do, we're just going to kind of take and perhaps apply, right, this process just to this particular one. Olivia, I'm going to stop sharing my screen, but I'm intrigued and I want to learn more from you about what you mean and what comes to mind when you say you want to empower your Indigenous partners as they foster healthy relationships within their own ministry context. So as you can see, I'm asking Olivia that first question, right? The question of definition. So Olivia, thank you again so much for you and your organization's faithfulness. And so I would love to hear a little bit more from you about that.
Great. Thank you, David. My name is Olivia Mulerwa.
Mulerwa, thank you.
Mulerwa, yes. But
apologize.
no worries there. It's not obvious, the pronunciation. I'm happy to be the guinea pig here this morning, afternoon, depending on where you are. So it's interesting, David, that you kind of picked up on that, because that training aspect of who we are is just one aspect of who we are as a ministry, but we can focus on that for the purpose of this conversation. And so when we say we empower our Indigenous leaders, we do that through providing access to training opportunities. And so we are a very small team, and sometimes that looks like our team as trainers. So training in everything from systematic theology to contextualization of the gospel within their context, because of course that's a very big deal. And also a lot of training on honor and shame dynamics and how those play out in understanding the gospel within, different contexts around the world.
Excellent, Olivia. Yeah, no, and I'm so glad you brought up the honor and shame, because we're actually, our journal, the Accord Journal, is doing a special issue on women in development. And one of the articles is on that honor and shame and the stigmatization of Eve. So thank you for bringing that. Let me just press you, right, as I kind of suggested, we do a little bit more. So you said, right, you talked about how you go about empowering Indigenous leaders, right, to providing access to particular kinds of trainings. What would the end result look like in terms of the empowerment itself? So Indigenous leaders are empowered. How do you know that they're empowered? What are you seeking for them to change in what ways? Obviously, they have access to it, but is just access empowerment, or do you mean something else by what the change will be for them? Is it just access, or is it something else?
Yeah, okay. If it's okay with you, David, I'll kind of take a step back. At Mission One, our tagline is to make communities look more like the kingdom of God, right? And so for us, that is first through planting healthy churches in communities where there are none. So we focus on unreached places and places where the gospel hasn't been. So our partners, our Indigenous partners, are essentially often planting the first church in the community. And so to bring that back, to answer your question regarding training, for us, that looks like having a healthy church with clear doctrine and, an understanding of what it means to be a follower of Jesus within that community. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, and I'm going to keep pressing it because this is
Okay.
part of that process, right? As
Yeah.
we're brainstorming through. So you are empowering then your Indigenous leaders, your Indigenous church planters, right, to do what you said, to create or to plant healthy churches. Again, I'm going to come back to that word empowerment. Does that mean that they have additional skills, that they have additional insights? What does that look like in terms of their empowerment? What do they gain that makes them more empowered?
Yes. So they gain a deeper understanding of biblical principles. That's the first thing. So from a theological academic standpoint, that is, they're empowered that way. So I'm talking about theological training, whether that is through short courses, long courses. One of our partners is a full-fledged seminary in India, and so they provide education all the way from rural church planters all the way to PhD. So there's that. The second level of empowerment that we're talking about is helping them to have their own ministries be locally sustained over the long term. And so for us, then success means, can this ministry continue to exist without us? Are they able to continue to plant churches, to continue to meet the needs in their communities without us? And so long term, that's what we mean by empowerment.
Oh, that's so exciting. So hopefully as and this is what I love about it, because I get to learn so much and be inspired by people like you, Olivia, and organizations. So what we've now seen, right, as we've talked about, and as I've been pressing you, right, for definition of empowerment, there are two things that come out, right? A deeper understanding of biblical principles, right? And number two, a more capacity, perhaps that's the wrong word, but I'm putting words in your mouth, right, to create sustainable ministries, right, in those two areas. All right, so for me, and we could probably keep pressing things a little bit more, but that's kind of two very specific aspects of empowerment. Right, so let's now go to the second question. Let's take that first level, right, a deeper understanding of biblical principles. It seems to me you've already said, right, how do you make sure, right, that you're getting to that you are enabling them to have a deeper understanding of biblical principles? Again, I heard you talked about training. Can you tell us a little bit more? What are the activities that will lead them to have this deeper understanding?
Okay, and so we have an assessment that we begin with, which has basically, these are the 10 things that somebody that is a ministry leader should know. And so kind of going through those basic biblical principles. So we start there. Do you feel comfortable in your knowledge in these areas? Yes or no? No. How can we support you to receive the training that you need? And support, because we're a small team, so we're not just doing the training ourselves. And so that's why I emphasize the access bit. We also provide financially support for our partners to receive training wherever they need it. And so our own actual training is a much smaller piece of that. So for example, we will do an annual pastors conference where we get all of the pastors together in one particular area, and, we'll spend time together over a 3-4 day period. But we recognize that's just scratching the surface as far as what the training needs may be. And so we go a step further and provide both financial support for individual ministry leaders to access the training that they need, but also sometimes it's more so connecting them to resources that already exist that are not necessarily that they don't know about, that could be free, and so on.
That's wonderful. So well thought through. And so what we've seen then, right, that you have activities, training activities that are very specifically geared towards very specific biblical principles, right, that you want people to understand. You mentioned an assessment. So I'm going to guess, and we'll actually just focus on this. I'm looking at time. I'm going to guess that the third step, right, in terms of measuring, right, whether in fact they have gained that deeper understanding, you probably have a pre and post, but I'm going to let you explain that. So what do you actually do to measure whether in fact they have that deeper understanding of the biblical principles that you feel are crucial?
Yeah, thank you, David. And, I appreciate you assuming that we don't have a post measurement. So maybe that's the takeaway. That's the takeaway for me from this meeting. We haven't gotten there yet as far as thinking through our own measurement processes. So, thank you for pointing that out. I appreciate it.
You're right. That's why you always want those three questions.
Yeah.
And Olivia, we could have done the same with that second aspect, right? Sustainable ministries. We would go through the same. Okay, what are the specific activities geared towards ensuring, right, that the capacity for creating sustainable ministries is there, and then measurement. But let's stop there because we want to open it up to questions. Olivia, thank you so much again for volunteering, and just love again what you're doing, and so inspired by it. So Steve, I think I'm going to thank you. I'll turn it over to you and let you curate the discussion from here.
Thanks, David. Appreciate it. That was wonderful. Hope you all gained something from that. I don't think I saw any. Have I seen any questions in the chat yet? So what we're going to do is anyone that has a question, you're welcome to put it in the chat and I can ask it. But also you're welcome to raise your hand and ask David directly.
And I would also say, if anybody has any comments or has examples that they've done, perhaps something different or something that resonates, something that you found useful along those same lines, because again, I really look forward to learning from your own experiences as well. I think we all do, right? Learning from each other's experiences. I think I just spotted one, Steve, because something about soft stories and hard metrics. Did I spot one there? One question that came
through. How do soft measures like stories fit into hard metrics? So that's
soft stories fit into hard metrics. So I'll take a crack at it and anybody else can jump in. So I think first of all, we need to define what we mean by hard metrics. I'm going to assume that probably when people use that word hard metrics, you're talking about quantitative measures as opposed to qualitative, because it seems like you are contrasting, right, stories, narrative, qualitative information with hard information. So there are two things there. First of all, I think it's so important to have in mind what the purpose of your measurement is, right? What are you seeking to accomplish by measuring something? And there's at least several different purposes. One is just reporting back to your donors, right? Because you need to do that for fundraising. Another would be to improve your programs, right? In other words, to create some kind of a feedback loop to see what you're doing well, what some of the unexpected consequences might be, what you might improve, right? So those are two generally purposes, and there are several others as well. So there are a couple of ways of approaching this, right? If you really feel that in order to improve, and let's talk about kind of the spiritual and social change, kind of the intangibles that are a little bit more difficult, right? If you feel that you really want feedback in order to improve your programs, hard metrics, quantitative information might be useful, right? So you would kind of set that up. Many times qualitative information is more useful to understand the why of things. And sometimes, right, mixed methods might come into play. If you're trying to prove, which would be another purpose, prove that your programs are having an impact, right? On the spiritual side, that can be a little bit tough, but proving something generally will call for a quantitative approach. And so kind of soft stories won't be as useful for that. But if you're looking to improve your programs, right, the soft stories are incredibly important. So I don't think I've necessarily answered the question head on as much as I've raised another issue, which is just probably make sure of what your purpose is. And once you're clear about your purpose of measuring, then you can also then decide, okay, what kinds of metrics? Do we go out and collect soft stories? Will that be most useful for us to measure what we want to see? So in Olivia's case, right? Do we want to prove, right, that a certain percentage has come to understand them? Do we or do we want to assess to what degree are they understanding them, right? How are they applying them, right? There might be different ways, right, that you want to capture certain kinds of information for your purposes. That makes sense, hopefully. I asked kind of a rhetorical question, I guess. I thought I saw a follow-up question for
Yeah, there was one more. I was gonna let Dave ask it in person, but I'm having a hard time unmuting him. Logan, are you able to unmute Dave?
Hey,
I
sorry
see
about that.
and I see some conversations happening in the chat, which is great. And I
Yeah.
can't wait to review those because I can't quite keep track of them. Yeah.
Great. Well, yeah, great to join you all. Yeah, so I just wanted to know, and this is a pretty broad question, so I acknowledge that. But if you, in your experience in your work, if you've had any insights from groups working in a humanitarian context, where you're much more limited in how you integrate and utilize your faith. Just for very, very brief background, we're working in mental health in the refugee context. And so we are very clear that we are a Christ-centered organization, but we are very limited in how we do that. That some of our power is being able to walk with people in their faith. But if we are accused of proselytizing, we could get kicked out, and then we have no no impact on that community.
Yeah.
So I'm just curious if you have any experience with that.
Yeah, Dave, absolutely. And this issue comes up both in what used to be called restricted area country or creative access countries, things along those lines, same kind of situation. And the answer is yes. And actually, these three questions originally came up as part of my just puzzling through and praying through some of those situations. And I think they're particularly helpful in that situation. So say you are in a humanitarian situation or creative access country situation where you know you are limited in terms of what you can say, how you can say it, even more so, that first question is going to help you, right? What realistically, what feasibly do we think, what kind of spiritual impact do we feasibly think we can have in this situation? I find particularly helpful, I don't know if you're familiar with the Engel scale to kind of help you think through that just very quickly. Engel scale developed by Jim Engel, and I'm going to paraphrase it because there's Grayscale came and adapted it, but basically what Engel said is we're all on a spectrum, right? On one end of being hostile to Christ and to God, and on the other end of completely submitting every area of our life to the lordship of Christ, right? So that's the scale. And what Engel said is we have a problem, right? Because missionaries go out into very difficult situations. They have no converts to show for their efforts. So do we say that their efforts have been useless because they don't have anything to show for? He said, no, this scale helps us understand that missionaries in certain contexts take people from being hostile to Christ and Christians to saying, hey, Christians are pretty good people, right? They bumped people up that scale, right? And that is a spiritual impact, right? If you take it from being far from God to close to God, they have bumped people up to being closer to God, closer to Christians. So that's why I think these three questions are particularly useful, because knowing that you have certain limits, that first question forces you to think about what can we realistically expect. Now, of course, the Spirit will work as the Spirit wills, but the Spirit uses us as well in this. And so, and then you go to your second, right? Okay, what activity, what can we do to try to accomplish perhaps that more limited, realistic goal that we have? And that's where I think you'll find a little bit of back and forth. And then third, right, if it is at all even possible to measure that, which usually you can, right? There are creative ways through some proxy variables, you can establish that. Dave, hopefully that was helpful. But that has been my experience. And Ray Norman, out of World Vision now, he used to be at Messiah, was actually
Mhm.
using these 3 questions with some of the work they were doing in certain areas.
Yeah, thanks. That's helpful. Yeah, and that scale really resonates a lot because we work in the area of mental health, so that really seems in line with kind of a readiness to change model, which a lot of times we're looking from a mental and spiritual standpoint. So that's
Dave,
helpful.
there's
Thanks.
another,
I'll look up that angle scale.
yeah, Dave,
Yeah.
and just write me and I can point it to you. Dave, there's another organization called Unto, Chelsea and Molly, I forget their last names right now. They are doing some great work and much thinking about this on the spiritual side of things. They're part of our KIF Spiritual Impact Learning community. And they're doing, yeah, I think you would really benefit from being in touch with them.
Okay.
Yeah, just zip me an email. I'll put you in touch with them.
Sounds great. Thanks.
Yep, you're welcome.
So, just so you know, I might miss one question or two. If I miss a question and you were higher up on the list, please just raise your hand. I want to go back to Joey. But before I do that, Lori asked, how could we learn more about Olivia's ministry? And she did put her contact information in the chat. I know how hard it is to be under the microscope like that. So I would love to give her a shout out. Thank you so much, Olivia. So Joey, well, if you could unmute Joey Logan, that would be great.
Yeah, my question is in regards to a soft story, could that not be seen as an opportunity to delve deeper? So go back to the person you're hearing that story from and use that to gather more hard data?
Yeah, Joey, quick question. So a couple of things come to mind. I'll go into a little bit of stream of consciousness. There's a methodology called most significant change. If you don't know about it, you can Google it, which is actually collecting stories and then kind of through stories, kind of collecting data out of them and kind of approaching things that way. There's also in the qualitative field through stories actually creating quantitative data based on certain patterns and frequencies that you find. And thirdly, directly to your question, yes, absolutely, right? I mean, when you see something in a soft story that calls your attention to it, that you're thinking, hey, we really need to look more into this. And that can happen with sometimes with quantitative data as well. You can definitely go back. I think one of the things, right, in all of this is just the time element. Do you have time to go back? A lot of people have found a lot of good use with focus groups, right? Meaning gathering the community together or gathering your constituencies together, doing it as a group. Because in the group, as people say things, you can explore more deeply right there and then, right? And it's a very rich time. It also tends to build fellowship, can create some conflict sometimes, right? And that needs to be facilitated well. So yes, Joey, I think you're absolutely right. And I don't know whether there's a difference between a soft story and a hard story. You have me like thinking about that now, right? What would a hard story be versus a soft story? And I don't know if soft story is redundant, but now you have me thinking along some other lines, right? Because stories can be prompted by certain questions, right? And so most significant change has kind of a little bit of a protocol to it. So perhaps a soft story is one where it's just completely open-ended. So I warned you I was going to stream of consciousness. Any thoughts about that, Joey?
Yes, I was going to put in the comments. To me, I wasn't thinking in those terms, but a hard story would be one where you're following up after some type of ministry and a local religious leader comes and he says, we took what you taught us and we shared it, and we have added 3 more small groups to our church. And that equals about 30 more people that are regularly attending our church. To me, that's data that you can immediately then mine. I can write that down. This is one person in a church. He's saying he's added 3 small groups, 30 more attendees. On the other hand, a soft story would be going back into the community and say one of the women that you're meeting with, she's a member of the church or could be the pastor, but she talks in general about just the attitude in the community. Like she begins to say, there just seems to be less tension in the community, or there have been issues in the community that now for some reason, I believe because we've been praying, that this tension is dissipating. Well, I want to dig deeper now. I want to understand that difference, and can I verify that with other stories and other people in that community.
I love that, Joey. Yeah, no, I hadn't thought about that terminology of soft and hard story. It sounds to me what you're describing is right. One story, actually, as you said, it gives you hard data, right? Facts and figures. The other one is more going towards the why question, right? So the first is the hard story is kind of the what, right? The second one is the why that allows you to explore more and gives you inspiration to do so. Good stuff. Thank you. Appreciate that insight.
All right, next Jim sent me a direct message, and then Federico would be next. Jim, did you want to ask your question? I'll Logan, can you unmute Jim?
Sure. I was just basically asking how you design the data collection process. If you are looking for a quantitative result, how do you design that process from those stories or from the mission and the answer to the three questions, and then how do you implement that with fidelity going forward in over a reasonable period of time to establish credibility in your measurement and your metrics?
Yeah, Jim, great question. So one of the things I always like to be careful of, especially for those organizations that don't have dedicated monitoring evaluation staff, is to not discourage people from doing something just because it's not scientific enough or it's not validated enough, right? And I think these three questions give people a way to get started that provide tremendously useful information, right, in terms of feedback for their programs. Now, there are others, right, as you develop more capacity, as you're saying, if you want to do something that's more quantitative, especially, and again, you can do something quantitative, you know, at a very easy level, right? Which is just, as Joey just said, collecting some facts and figures, right? Trying to see patterns in them. But, you know, if you're doing something where all of a sudden you really want to be more scientific about it in terms of possibly, you know, are we really sure that what people are telling us is right? And this tends to be more when you're handing out surveys and questionnaires at a larger scale. So there is then that third question, right? How do we go about measuring this? That's when you start thinking about that. And especially on the quantitative side, I would suggest that, you know, if you don't have the technical expertise to take that leap to the next level, that you look for it. Out of Bruce Wydick, I don't know how many of you know him, right? Out of right now Notre Dame, he's also, I think, at Berkeley, if I remember correctly. They actually have just created a group called Seeds, and they are volunteering to come help Christian development, relief and development organizations do these kinds of quantitative studies. There are also various people who have been involved in it on a consulting basis, right? And one of the people that I've been working very closely with both on this, and I know he's done also work with businesses, is James Waters out of KIF. IDO Research, right, is another one. So I think especially when you're looking to go to what you just mentioned, you know, where it's validated, if you're looking to do to prove what you're doing through a randomized controlled trial, at that point, that third question helps you become aware of that, right? That we do need to bring in more expertise. But again, I really want to stress that I don't believe it's necessary to go to that level if you don't have the personnel or the time, because you can still, you know, just get great valuable information, which is really, to my feeling is the most important purpose is to help improve your programs. And as part of that also, I think it's just so incredibly important to involve the local population in designing these things, right? And taking your cues from them. That's one of the reasons I was so inspired by what Olivia is doing, right? I mean, they're really taking their cues from the local basis. And Roland Hawksbergen, who's co-editor with me of the journal, just reminded me that Bruce is at the University of San Francisco. Thank you, Roland, for that. Jim, I don't know if that answered your question or if you had a follow-up to that, or some additional thoughts and insights on it.
Oh, the only
Yes.
question as a follow-up to that would be many times donors or investors are looking at things more quantitatively, and they want to see that over a period of time rather than just a episodic point in the growth of the organization. So I don't know whether there's tools like you just mentioned that could help with that, may be worth talking about or providing some resources.
Yes, absolutely. And you're right? That donor pressure comes in various forms, right? Usually it's quantitative for many of the Christian philanthropic organizations, right? They want to be measuring conversions. This KIF learning community that we're a part of, we just finished having a robust discussion on should you measure conversions? If you do, how should you go about it? If you have a chance and are interested in more of this, the spiritual metric side of things, you could, if you feel so led, you could join our spiritual metrics discussion forum where we put information there. I just noticed that Kim had also mentioned Kurt Wilson as another consultant who's doing wonderful work in this area. He is with Effect X. Thank you, Kim, for reminding us of that. So yes, Jim, I think definitely kind of looking for some help. And again, you can write me if you want, and I can just kind of reiterate and give you a list, right, of who's doing what in this area too. Once you start mentoring somebody who's doing consulting, you always are afraid of leaving out all the others who are doing good work. So I apologize to all those who I'm leaving out, and please remind me if that's so.
So next we have Federico. Logan, if you could take them off mute.
Hi, Dave. How are you doing? Thank you for delivering this talk today. So my question basically is if you could recommend additional resources for delving deeper into this important topic of measuring spiritual impact in faith-based organizations. Thank you.
You're welcome. Yes, Federico, thank you. If you're not familiar with the journal that Roland Hoxbergen and I are co-editing, and just a shout out to Roland, he was the first one to take the reins of this journal. It's about 5 or 6 years old. Steve Offit was co-editor. But I would say check out the journal, crda.org, if I remember correctly. Roland, maybe you could put the link there. We have several articles on this there. And again, we have issues, so not every issue is dedicated to that. So several I think you'd find helpful. I also think that as far as additional resources, I'm happy to share if you haven't seen it already. And I noticed Ellen Strom was on here. With Ellen Strom and Mark Forshaw and others, we started in the process of a book on measuring spiritual impact. And it's been my fault that it's not out yet for these last 7 years. I won't go into that. But I do have a draft chapter that I wrote that people seem to have found useful to help clarify some things. Happy to share that with you as well. Just zip me an email. I can get that to you. And maybe what we can do is, if others are interested, we could just mail it out to everybody as a whole who's attending. There's not, I think between those two things, and also I see Courtney, who I am blessed to have as a research assistant, and we're involved. She just put it on there. She just put it in the chat, the Spiritual Metrics and KIF Learning Committee, so you can sign up for that newsletter. A lot of this, Federico, is there's not a lot out there. We're kind of in the incipient stages. Kurt Wilson has a few pieces on measuring intangibles, which are really helpful as well. And those are the ones that come to mind now. I appreciate that question. I would also say, if you're interested, we have what's called the Accord Research Alliance. And if you sign up for that mailing list, you'll then get access to, we hold a spiritual metric, an intensive each year in October. Last year was on spiritual metrics. This next year will be on spiritual metrics as well. But every year we have topics on how do you integrate faith into measurement with an eye towards Christian development organizations. And a few of the articles in our journal have come out of that space as well. So looking at, and Courtney just put that very helpfully in there as well. Appreciate that. Federico, thanks for your question.
And I'll also say, I think we've already mentioned this, but David has graciously offered to stick around after we close this out in 10 minutes. If anyone doesn't get their questions answered, please stick around and he will field them then. The next question is from Daryl. It's similar to the last one. So Daryl, did that answer your question, or did you have a follow-up about nonprofit orgs evaluating impact?
Yeah, I think David has begun at least to back into the question. So looking for an annotated bibliography, David, or something like that, if you've got the beginnings of one that maybe have emerged from these forums, including your commentary, comparing, contrasting your own evaluations of the evaluators or evaluating processes, anything like that. So
Daryl, first of all, great to see you again, and thanks for all your work in bringing us together back a few years around
You're
the
welcome.
several
Thank you.
issues. So the learning community that I've mentioned several times, we're actually in the process of creating a library of resources that will have some annotations, but will also be searchable through some tags. Right now, in terms of kind of a literature review, the closest thing that I know of that's out there is that chapter that I wrote. It's a bit outdated at this point, but I think still has a lot of useful information in it. But we would all love to hear, right? If anybody's come across any other literature reviews on this subject, that would be great. And Daryl, that library will perform that function to a certain degree, because it will be a library both of tools, practical tools that are being used by people out there, but also it will have more academic resources and popular resources on this topic. We have discussed annotating each and every entry, but we don't quite have at this point the person power to do so. So yes, that's a great idea.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Sure, you're welcome.
Also, we are going to send up a follow-up email. We'll have a recording of this webinar, and then I'm going to work with David on jam-packing that email full of all kinds of resources that he didn't mention on this call or did mention. The next question is from John Bottomore, if I'm pronouncing your name right. Logan, if you could, oh, there you go.
I think he was remuted. There
Oh,
you
we
go.
Okay, yeah. Hi, David. Hi, everyone. I work for a biblical worldview teaching and training ministry that primarily operates in the international economic development domain. It came out of a big Christian NGO. And so we do a lot of teaching, training, publishing, et cetera. And obviously, like everybody else, using social media more and more and more now, rather than just, typical face-to-face training. My question gets to measuring. We train people in many different ways, including online training. They then take the training and the principles and apply them within their own spheres of influence. And sometimes the people that they train do it in their spheres of influence. So it's really about a movement type of an approach of things. How do we get at measurements that really evaluate the quality of our programs? We can obviously evaluate feedback directly from people who are trained, but we're looking at our training to be taken by churches and then make in parachurch organizations and make big impact in their communities for transformation that we may never see. So how do you recommend we go about getting some sense of downstream feedback and downstream impact that we can use to evaluate our programs and report to our donors?
Yeah, that's a great. So you actually anticipated with the last words that you said, which I was going to ask you, what would you be seeking to accomplish, right, through that kind of evaluation? And you said so you could report to your donors. Obviously, it's nice to know whether you're having an impact or not. I didn't necessarily hear, right, we would like to evaluate it, and that this is not to say it's bad, but I just want to make sure I understood you correctly, that we want to evaluate so we can improve our programs. I think what I hear is you really want to kind of evaluate in a sense, right, to see what kind of impact you've had. So a couple of things quickly come to mind. One is, I do think that sometimes when you're talking about that movement, it's just really hard to evaluate your impact when you say that, right? And there's the whole conversation of, did you contribute to something or did you cause something, right? So we faced this when we were doing a lot of advocacy work, right, around some very difficult issues. If you know the term wicked problems, they're extremely complicated, involve a lot of different actors. So we can't say that we caused something. We can say we contributed to bring it about, which I actually think is more biblical anyway, right? For us to say that we caused something is probably, it kind of gives me a little bit of the willies, right? Because the spirit
somewhat prideful, yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So so I would say just what comes to mind, if you really would like to try to get a sense of the scope of what you've contributed to, you might be able to just again through social media, right, put a call out for all of those, right, who have been a part of that movement, right, to respond to something you put out there. Make sure that people you send it to, right, you do what's called a snowball effect, have them send it to people they worked with, and do a little bit of a snowball, right, just to have people. And here's where I think stories would be really neat, right, because I think the quantitative aspect would be a little bit tough, but if you gather some stories first, you might then actually be able to do something on the quantitative side. So I would say maybe just think about snowballing something, right, with some questions on there, very simple, right, maybe 2 or 3 questions. Hey, can you send out to anybody else you know, and then have it feed back into you? I think that would start getting some pretty interesting results. But just off the top of my head.
Thank you, David. Yeah, I
You're
like
welcome,
it.
Don. Thanks for the
Appreciate
questions, and congratulations on your work. Sounds great.
Thank you.
So we're gonna stop the questions for now. The first question we'll ask, if you can stay, Graham, because you asked a great question that I'm really excited to hear David answer. So anyone that can stay, that'll be the first question we'll ask. Before we pray and close out, Logan is going to put a poll up, and if you could help us out, we just want to have a better idea of what kinds of topics people would be most interested in us covering in future webinars. So if you could quickly answer that, that would be amazing. I wish I had the Jeopardy music, but I'm not very good of a hummer, so I'm not going to do that. So while you guys are filling that out, I just again want to thank you, David, so much for jumping on here and giving some of your wisdom and insight, experience, and fielding all of these great questions. Olivia, thank you so much for being the guinea pig. You did an incredible job. Again, mission1.org, right? mission1.org. If you want more information about Olivia. And thank you all for taking the time out of your day. I know you're all busy, and I really appreciate it. We'll send you a follow-up email that'll have information about Ardent. It'll have more information about this topic, and will be a copy of this webinar. So, Lloyd Reeb, I saw that you were on the call. Would you be willing to pray us out? This is the chair of our board and one of our co-founders, and he has been so instrumental in making Ardent Mentoring get off the ground and start flying. So are you there? Can you unmute him, Logan?
I'm all set. Ready to go, Steve, Ryan, and just wonderful time together. Lots to learn. Dear Lord, thank you for each of these ministries. I pray that you would give them wisdom as they look for clarity around what's working and not working, to improve what they're doing, to touch our world and bring joy and redemption. Thank you for the way you've gifted each of these people to know and live out your call in their lives. And we at Ardent just want to inspire them and be a wind at their back, and just pray your blessing on their work. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen.
Amen. Bless you all. And stick around if you want to hear Graham's question and others.
I saw Graham's question, and it's a great one.
Yeah, I was kind of hoping I should have saw it earlier. I would have probably bumped it up the list a little bit.
I'm actually thinking what we should do is make sure we have all the questions in the chat, and then in the email, what we can do is kind of provide additional answers to the ones we didn't get to, or even, I noticed in the chat some people were giving additional insights and wisdom and kind of combine those, right? Because there are many others that have a lot of great things to say into this. Yeah. So
Yeah.
Graham asked whether we should be measuring spiritual metrics or not, spirituality or not, spiritual impact or not, right? Did I capture that one correctly?
Yeah. Can we just unmute Graham real quick? I'd like her to, or is it him? Graham, Graham, to him. Can we unmute him, Logan? Is he unmuted? All right. Take it away.
Yeah, and it may be like a moot point, because as we've said, we're often doing M&E for our donors, and our donors probably have a quantitative bias, because that was probably what helped them become the kind of people who could be donors. But yeah, it's this question of especially if we're talking about like spiritual formation or discipleship, things that are intangible, or even just with the sort of some of the paradoxes in our faith, a little bit like if you were to evaluate Christ's ministry and say 30 years, nothing or very little. 2 years, oh, there's all these people. And then like there's this Friday where it's like, ooh, like there's nobody, there's like the one Christian, or maybe, yeah, who's next to him on the cross. And that kind of these like inversions in our faith that actually sort of resist quantification in some ways. So that's a meandering question, and sorry, it took me a while to formulate it as well, because it
No,
does
it's
feel a little
good.
forbidden. Yeah.
No, no, it's not forbidden at all. It's actually one that we have wrestled with and continue to wrestle with. So I'll just again go a little bit of stream of consciousness on you and see where it leads us, hopefully prayerfully. So first of all, I do think that there's scriptural basis for measuring spiritual growth, right? I think that's pretty clear, right? That we are to test ourselves. The interesting thing is, right, that seems to be primarily in scripture, primarily at the individual levels, right? Test yourselves, but there does seem to be a community aspect to it as well, right? So I wrote a thought piece on the ethics of spiritual metrics that kind of goes through this. And so the question then becomes, if we are engaged, right, in measuring spiritual growth, and again, that can be defined in different ways, as you pointed to, Graham, right? Different traditions, right, will come up with different indicators of it. Courtney, who I mentioned before, is from the Orthodox tradition, right? She's doing a piece on what that might look like from the Orthodox tradition. And, right, it becomes even more complicated by two things that you mentioned. One is the nature of spiritual growth is not linear, upwards, right? If you all like me, it's like you're going up and down, hopefully with an upward slope, right? As you become more mature. But again, if you are trying to measure it, and I'll get to this a little bit later, if you are trying to measure things somewhat quantitatively, you hit somebody when they're at their low spot, and then you do test them later on, you hit them at their high spot, it looks like they jump hugely, but you might also hit somebody at their high spot, test them at their low spot, it looks like they've become worse. And because of, and we actually just finished discussing this in the learning community, great insight, right? You will have, like, each of us might answer questions where our standard was one, but all of a sudden we become aware that we've fallen way so much more short because we're more spiritually mature. So we're going to self-rate ourselves lower than what we did before, because now we're more aware of how much further there is to go, right? So it's kind of cool, right? In that ways. Where I tend to come down on is, first of all, and again, this is partly in the paper, we have to be really careful about measuring other people's spirituality, because there are all kinds of ethical implications that come from it, and the ways that you portray and represent people. And so I think it's absolutely essential, as with any good research, not only to have the community buy-in, fully transparent, right, kind of, full consent and all that kind of thing, but to really make sure that you're doing it in benefit of the local community. The community itself is leading the way. And I think it's also more effective that way. So I'm kind of jumping from place to place. And it's interesting, World Vision pioneered a really interesting study where they went around to communities around the world and asked them what in that community, what do you think spiritual growth would look like? Right? I mean, great idea. And so what they saw, and this is where the quantification comes in, that yes, the responses were different across the world, but they tended to fall into 4 or 5 categories that were identical, right? And so what you can do in that case, right, if you're trying to go for some kind of quantitative aspect to it, right, even though what we would call the indicators, right, or what people have come up with as signs and markers of spiritual growth are different, right, that category as a whole, you're right, you could potentially aggregate those, right, and come up with a score and kind of growth or not. So there's a lot of puzzling through of this, but to summarize it, to come back to kind of the heart of your question, I think that more and more people are thinking, that yes, I think the consensus is that yes, it is good and important to measure spiritual impact, but we just have to be really careful on how we go about it in many, many dimensions. And feel free to follow up, and others can chime in, right, if with your own insights as well.
Graham, did you want me to Logan, can you just unmute everyone? That way, yeah, this is more like back.
Everybody's free. You're all
We're
free.
the back. We're on the back porch now.
Unlock the cages.
Yeah, just
Yeah.
be a little bit more messy. So if you have Graham, if you want to comment, if anyone wants to raise their hand, feel free.
Yeah, I really appreciated what you said, David, about the that there's a lot of ethical potential pitfalls, and how it actually pushes you into like kind of denominational positions pretty quick if you're trying to be specific about it, which can be, I think, tricky for those of us who are trying to work with lots of denominations. And I think I also just like interrogating why we feel like we need to measure everything a little bit, and what some of the implications are of that, as someone who's professionally involved in measurement.
No, those are good questions to ask, right? I think that there's clear scriptural basis for planning, and there's clear scriptural basis, right, for testing and for measuring. And so I think, God has given us these gifts, right, of being able to discern cause and effect, even as God's hand is still in it, right? We can't control all the variables, so we can't control cause and effect. But I do think that that there are many important ways in which planning and measuring are important. But again, you get so tempted and so seduced, right, by the measuring aspect, that sometimes you forget, right, that what I believe is when you're measuring something, hopefully you're designing in such a way to contribute to what you're trying to achieve, right? And a lot of people, it's more extractive, right, than taking into account the impact that the surveying itself has on people, and how might you use that, right, to enhance your quote unquote impact itself. Sorry, Graham, I might have cut you off there.
No, not at all. And I see other people are ready to go, so I'm also gonna be quiet for a little bit.
Thanks, appreciate your questions. Great stuff.
David, I'm also just going to turn this over to you. So
okay, Rebecca, you want to jump in, and then Richard after that? Or Richard, I saw you in. Yeah, Rebecca, go first, and then Richard.
I think Richard was first. I'll let him go.
Thank you, Rebecca. Richard, you're first.
Yeah, we're really interested in the idea of taking some of the noise that happens in the lower third that gets in the way of their spirituality or faith, and try and develop a biblical metric concept that can align with the return on investment and categorize it more as a return on life, to bring that group or individual, or specifically a community, back into being more God as intended us to be. And rather than focus on all the noise and the storm and the stresses that happen in our normal flesh life, and try and establish some sort of a biblical metric that can scale that, and not change necessarily the culture, but impact the culture in each community, so it develops a circular economy within that community that enhances everybody's faith, because they don't have all these stressors pulling on it and getting in the way. Is that something that's out there? Or, we're creating a lot of different pulses on different cultures, whether it's here in a small community in the US, or a tribal community in Africa, or, everybody has different needs. But if we can take out the stressors, then we can start focusing on how God intended that community to live.
Thanks, Richard. Yeah, interesting, because just yesterday I was speaking with somebody who was talking about return on gifts, meaning God has given us certain gifts, right? How are we, in a sense, creating a return on them? So it sounds like something similar. So, Richard, I would love it if you would just zip me an email so we can talk more about this, because it's a little bit hard for me to discern without taking more time asking a few more questions to what extent other people might be doing pieces of this. I think what resonates with me is it sounds to me like you have an idea of how you might be able to accomplish this, which goes back to that first question, right? That you're trying to achieve. It seems to me that you have a pretty good idea of what you're trying to achieve. Where my questions are going to be is in that question number 2, right? What exactly do you feel that you can do in order to achieve that? So I would love to hear more about that, learn from what you're doing, possibly put you in touch with people, right, who might you might be able to brainstorm with. But I am absolutely intrigued, especially given the conversation I had yesterday with a colleague of mine at Eastern University who is doing some work on actually a particular way of approaching Bible study, helping people to do that, and then do that ROG, right? You mentioned a return on, and I forget what term you used.
Return on life.
Thank you. ROL, right? So, and
Yeah.
of course, I'm in the background. So yes, please, let me. Courtney, did you have something to speak to this or another question before we go to Rebecca?
Yeah, just really quickly, Graham. So one of the things that we've talked a lot about in the KIF learning community and just in general around spiritual metrics is the question of turning back your measurements on yourself, right? And like having that be a really in-depth process that is continuously happening as you are evaluating communities, just because in our Christian walk, I think it can often be where we're trying to help people, we're trying to lead people to the Lord, we are trying to do this. And whenever we are dealing with sharing our faith with people, we should always be looking at how is this helping me grow, right? Like what areas am I wrestling with? Am I dealing with? Am I confronting? And then how am I recognizing faithfulness in people that I'm trying to help in the community? How has God already impacted this person even prior to me meeting them, my organization, or even knowing Christ? Because I think honoring that, and in the Orthodox perspective, we talk the difference between a 2-story universe and a 1-story universe, with 1 story being God has been there since the beginning. He's within creation and including human beings. And so I think it's a challenge, but it's definitely one that's worth exploring.
Good stuff, Courtney. If I remember correctly, it was Rebecca Redfield from Hope that made that kind of call, right? To have us apply the questions that we're asking others to ourselves first. So making sure that we feel comfortable asking ourselves those questions. Good. Rebecca. Thanks, Courtney.
Yeah, I'm going back to the spiritual metrics and whether we should be measuring them. I had this discussion with somebody at the Accord conference that I was sitting next to. We have to be real careful what we measure, because she said some donors asked them to measure souls saved. We can't look at the heart. Only God can do that. Our organization does actually look at like baptisms, church attendance, church involvement, things like that, outside appearance. But I think we do have to be careful about judging the heart and saying, yeah, these people are saved, because we don't know that. Only God knows that.
Yeah, thanks, Rebecca. We actually just finished in the learning community having a huge discussion on should we measure salvation or not, right? Soul saved or not. And part of that discussion revolved around measuring it directly, measuring it indirectly through proxy variables. But I think the consensus was exactly where you said you can never know for sure, right? And if you can never know for sure, should you be trying to measure that at all as opposed to spiritual growth? So in questions, right, of should you be measuring fruit versus a cognitive understanding of salvation by grace? Here's where we start getting denominational differences, right? So a lot of very interesting discussions. I think you hit the nail on the head. Anytime you venture into this territory, you want to be very careful, cautious, prayerful about it, and really try to follow the leading of the Spirit. So appreciate that, Rebecca. Audra.
Sorry, I had to figure out where my unmute button went. So I totally agree with what you just said, but I do think from a strategic standpoint, it's worthwhile to ask the question because our donors are asking that question. That's what I find. So our organization, Freshwater Friends, is gospel enabling, and that we do humanitarian work in unreached villages in South Asia. And by doing that sort of outreach and working with gospel partners who are in church planting networks and similar organizations, that creates enough goodwill for them to go into these villages. And when I talk to our donors, what they want to know is, well, how many people are coming to the fellowships? How many people are coming to the Bible studies? They're like interested in how many people have water for like 2 seconds. And they're interested in how many people are coming to Bible study for years. And that's the metric they ask about over and over. So, and I ran into this at Vacation Bible School when I was, 10 years ago when my kids were really little. People say, well, it was all our kids and then we had 2 kids come from the community. Is it worth it to put in this much effort and this much resource when we have 2 kids who have come from the community? And it is a question that you have to ask, is at what point do the resources end? Because resources don't just fall from the sky always. We have to be wise with how we steward them. So at what point do the resources end balance out with any kind of tangible result?
Yeah, Audra, that's great. And I love that metric of how many people are coming to Bible studies, because it's not a metric of whether they're being saved or not, but it is a metric, right, of kind of a process, hopefully leading to that. And, we all desire each and every single person to come to know Jesus Christ as their Lord and Savior. And so absolutely, I agree. I think what I also would want to say is that I think it's important as well that as you gather insights that might be perhaps at odds with donors sometimes. In the 1970s, there's a whole kind of movement on donor education, right? And I think we all do this naturally, that it's so important, right, to take donors where they are and help them grow spiritually as well, right? And with insights that you're gaining, gleaning from the community. And so I would not want us to take donors and just say, well, the donors want this, so we should do it. I think, as you said, strategically, right, it obviously is something that's important. I would hope that at the same time we could also talk about how do we, help our donors grow spiritually and educate them just as we ourselves are being educated. And so yeah, I love what you're saying. I love that metric. And as far as kind of the cost benefit analysis, yeah, if you don't have that kind of information, right, it is hard. Again, kind of we get back to Graham's question, right? But how you make those decisions, and I think that's one element. What I would say is that, if you're saying you are a Christian development organization, I think it's imperative for you to pray about what specifically, what is the spiritual dimension of our work, right? Right. If you're in the humanitarian sphere, in the WASH sphere, in the economic development sphere, the health aspect, right? It's very tempting to not pay attention, right, to the spiritual side of things, or to leave it kind of in there as a little bit ambiguous and kind of thinking, well, it's going to happen. I really like to push organizations to say, okay, well, really, right, one of the main factors making spiritual metrics is important is because it does force you to focus in on the spiritual dimensions of your work. And we actually had a webinar with Jaya Kumar Christian in which we kind of explored more how, the forcing yourself to measure a spiritual dimension of your work keeps it on the table. It keeps it before you and makes sure it's important, because it's just the way of the world is it tends to drive that out, right? It tends to have you focus more on the psychosocial, right, on the physical, and making sure that you're measuring something, make sure also that it keeps it as something that matters. I don't know. I went stream of consciousness on you again, Audra. I apologize if I was too meandering.
No, I think that makes a lot of sense. And that's something we've exactly run into as an organization, because there are other organizations that were founded from a faith-based perspective, but are emphatically, vocally not faith-based, that are doing the same things that we're doing for a totally different reason. So, and still totally valid, wonderful organizations. It's not like it's a competition who's a better person or Christian or whatever. That's not what it is. But from the position of our donors, when they're asking, well, why do I support you and not support them? It's not because they care about water, because if they just cared about water, they could give to anybody. They're supporting us because we're doing this extra dimension to our work. And if that dimension were to go away, our donors would also.
Yeah. And, you know, I mean, to a certain extent, right? I think that that is rightfully so, right? Because when, especially Christian development organizations, when we say we're integrating faith into our work, right? I think that's something that we need to make sure we can explain how and why that is the case. And as you pointed to, right, what we think the results are on the spiritual side of things. So yeah, thank you so much for that.
Thank you.
All right, are we done? Any other thoughts or comments or questions, insights? Logan, are we capturing? We're able to capture all the chat, right? Awesome. So exciting. Richard, thank you so much. I saw that you put your contact information in there. I'll grab that out of the chat.
Yeah, I liked your idea, David, about taking the questions that weren't answered, if there were any, and answering them. But we can add a lot of content.
We may have got them all.
Yeah, I think we might. Yeah, but we
I
can add
think
some.
we were able to cover them all. I really
think
like this cartoon Graham put out as well.
Yeah, I saw that. It was funny.
Keeps making me laugh.
Look at that.
David, thank you so much for joining us today. It is incredible conversation, and I know we were the ones to host the event, but wow, did I learn a lot that will be incredibly beneficial in my work, not only with Ardent, but a number of other things I'm involved in. So thank you so much.
You're welcome. I mean, I learned a ton too. I mean, just from Graham's comments, Audra's, the soft story versus hard stories. I mean, Courtney's intervention as well. It's just it's great. So thank you so much for the opportunity, and looking forward to seeing what the feedback is in terms of you know, what more we might be able to do to follow up on this.
Wonderful. I think we will go ahead and close the call now, Logan. And I hope that all of you have a wonderful day. Thank you all for joining us, and thank you incredibly for your participation in such a significant way and sticking around for almost an extra half an hour. David, we pray blessing upon your day and look forward to the next time we connect.
Thanks likewise. Logan, thanks for all your work behind and in front of the scenes too. Take care. Bye-bye.